201. Hold on to that number because everything else in this report builds on it. 201 Russian vessels, tankers, cargo ships, oil carriers, ferries struck by Ukrainian drones in just 3 weeks. Not by a navy, not by fighter jets, not by missiles launched from carriers, by unmanned systems operating at a scale naval warfare has simply never seen before. And as of this morning, the Kerch Strait, the only passage linking Russia's Sea of Azov to the wider Black Sea, is blocked indefinitely. That single fact carries enormous weight for Vladimir Putin, for his war machine, and for the survival of Russian forces in occupied Crimea. But before unpacking what it means, it's worth covering what happened on the ground in the last 24 hours, because the land war just took a turn that should concern anyone tracking this conflict closely. It is Wednesday, July 29th, 2026, day 1617 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And after decades spent studying military campaigns and battlefield outcomes, what's unfolding right now stands apart from anything seen in this kind of analysis before. Ukraine is running a multi-domain campaign simultaneously, at sea, in the air, on the ground, and deep inside Russian territory, with a level of precision and operational creativity that most professional militaries in the world simply don't possess. Start at the front line. In the 24 hours ending late Tuesday, Ukraine's general staff logged 226 combat engagements across the entire front, an extraordinary figure that tells its own story. Russia is not slowing down, not conserving its forces, but pushing hard. The single most intense pressure point on the eastern front right now is the Pokrovsk direction in Donetsk Oblast, where Russian troops launched 29 separate assaults in a single day, pushing toward small settlements like Vasilivka, Kotlin, Udakny, Novomykolaivka, and Molodetska. These villages matter less for themselves than for what lies past them. Russia's operational goal is to punch west of Pokrovsk and break into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, which would reshape the entire geography of the war. But here's what actually happened. On the Pokrovsk axis alone, Ukrainian forces killed 32 Russian soldiers, wounded 9 more, destroyed 27 personnel shelters, a fuel depot, 6 artillery systems, 3 drone control points, and neutralized 296 Russian drones in a single day on a single axis. That's the kind of attrition rate that grinds armies down, and still Russia keeps feeding more men into it. 47 kilometers southeast on the Kostiantynivka axis, Ukrainian forces beat back 27 assaults. On the Sloviansk axis, 19 more were stopped. On the Lyman axis, 8. This is not a collapsing front, it's a front holding under punishing pressure, and every day Russia burns through manpower on these grinding assaults is a day it cannot recover, reposition, or reconstitute for a breakthrough elsewhere. The scale of Russian losses puts all of this in perspective. Ukraine's general staff now estimates Russian military losses at approximately 1,352,980 personnel since the invasion began in February 2022. Even applying the discount factor most independent analysts use for these cumulative figures, the human cost remains staggering. In the same 24-hour window, Russia fired 190 guided aerial bombs at Ukrainian positions and carried out 2,047 separate shelling strikes, a tempo that demands enormous logistics, ammunition, and personnel just to sustain. Russia is throwing everything it has at Ukraine's lines, and Ukraine is still standing. Now to the development that genuinely reshapes the strategic picture of this entire war, Operation Malachka. On July 6, 2026, Ukraine's sea-based drone unit, its unmanned systems force, launched what it calls Operation Malachka, a name that roughly translates to Moscow will fall through Crimea. That's not just a code name, it's a doctrine. The operation is led by Robert Magyar Brovdy, commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, and over the past 23 days he has run one of the most remarkable naval campaigns in the history of maritime warfare. As of this morning, Ukrainian drones have struck 201 Russian vessels, 129 in the Sea of Azov, 72 in the Black Sea. Crucially, these aren't sinkings. The strategy is more calculated than outright destruction. The goal is to disable these vessels, turning them, in the commander's own words, into drifting barges, blind, deaf, unable to navigate or communicate or deliver cargo. Sinking ships creates oil spills, environmental disasters, and international backlash. Disabling them achieves the same strategic effect without that political cost. That's not brute force, that's several moves of forward thinking, and Russia has no real answer for it. The Sea of Azov, a shallow inland sea, sits at the center of Russia's logistics network supporting occupied Crimea and the wider southern front. Fuel, oil, grain, military cargo all move through it, or rather, they did. Transit permits through the Kerch Strait, the narrow choke point linking that sea to the Black Sea, are no longer being approved. Ukraine has effectively blockaded the strait without deploying a single conventional warship, asymmetric warfare at its most efficient. The supply line keeping Russian forces in Crimea alive has been severed, and the damage extends well beyond military logistics into Russia's entire oil export system. Tankers belonging to what analysts call Russia's shadow fleet, the aging, sanctions-evading vessels used to move Russian oil onto world markets, are now being systematically hunted and crippled. Every tanker that can't sail is oil that doesn't sell and revenue that never reaches Moscow's war budget. Connect that to everything else happening this month. Russia finances this war primarily through energy exports. Between the refinery strikes across Russian territory throughout July, including the major hit on the Omsk refinery, and the now systematic disabling of the tanker fleet that moves refined product to buyers, Ukraine is attacking the financial backbone of Russia's war effort directly. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte made the point explicitly at the NATO Defense Industry Forum in Ankara this month, noting that the alliance is building toward becoming a drone-ready force, investing in the very technologies Ukraine has proven on this battlefield. Ukraine has demonstrated something the world's most advanced defense establishments needed to see for themselves, that controlling sea lanes no longer requires conventional naval superiority. It requires scale, precision, and the creativity to deploy unmanned systems in ways an adversary never anticipated. Here's the core strategic takeaway. What Ukraine is doing and what NATO is studying closely is writing the new doctrine of modern warfare in real time. Deep strike drone campaigns against energy infrastructure, maritime drone operations against the Shadow Fleet, and relentless tactical drone warfare on the ground together form a three-dimensional squeeze on Russia's ability to fight. It hits the revenue stream, it hits the supply chain, it degrades combat power at the front. No single campaign would be decisive on its own. Together, executed concurrently and with this level of discipline, they're creating a strategic compression that Russia's war economy is struggling to absorb. On the diplomatic side, things are moving too. On Monday, July 28th, President Volodymyr Zelensky met with President Trump at the White House, the latest in a series of direct engagements between the two since Trump's second term began, following bilateral talks at the NATO summit in Ankara on July 8th. There, Zelensky argued that ballistic missiles remain Russia's last significant military advantage, pushed for more Patriot air defense systems, called on NATO members to move Ukraine's accession forward, and characterized Ukraine's strikes on Russian oil infrastructure not as escalation but as lawful, effective, long overdue economic warfare. The diplomatic picture is genuinely mixed. Trump has expressed public optimism, saying weeks ago the two sides were closer to a deal than ever, and his envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, have engaged Russian officials with reported progress, including a 20-point Ukrainian peace proposal said to have reached roughly 90% agreement at one stage. But Russia hasn't stopped fighting. While diplomats talked, Russian forces carried out one of the deadliest ballistic missile barrages of the war on Kyiv in early July, killing 31 civilians in a single night, struck a civilian vessel near Odessa, killing at least 10 crew members, and hit a holiday resort in occupied Zaporizhzhia, killing 5 children. Those aren't the actions of a government serious about peace, and both Kyiv and increasingly Washington appear to recognize that Russia will only negotiate seriously once convinced it cannot win outright on the battlefield. That's the logic behind Ukraine's entire current strategy. Every refinery strike, every disabled tanker, every repelled assault near Pokrovsk is building the leverage needed for a durable peace, not by ceding territory or accepting a frozen conflict that reignites in a few years, but by making the war too costly for the Kremlin to rationally sustain. None of that means peace is close. Putin has shown no genuine willingness to accept any settlement that doesn't validate his territorial gains, and the fighting on the ground reveals Russian intentions far more honestly than any statement from a Kremlin spokesperson. The NATO dimension deserves more attention than it's getting. The alliance's commitment at the Ankara summit included a $40 billion counter-drone investment plan, a shift from passive observation to active institutional transformation driven directly by lessons from this war. When NATO leaders talk about becoming a drone-ready alliance, they're really saying they've watched 4+ years of this conflict and concluded that future warfare looks like this: swarms of unmanned systems, autonomous naval strike platforms, and precision deep strikes on logistics and energy infrastructure. Advanced tanks and fighter jets still matter, but the decisive edge in modern combat is increasingly being built by young Ukrainian drone operators working out of shipping containers, guiding maritime drones toward Russian tankers in the middle of the night. There's one more layer worth understanding: the economic dimension. Russia's shadow fleet isn't just a logistics network, it's the mechanism Moscow uses to dodge Western sanctions and keep selling oil above the G7 price cap through aging tankers flagged by third countries, insured through opaque intermediaries, and routed to avoid Western jurisdiction. It is, in effect, Russia's financial lifeline. The International Maritime Organization formally condemned Ukraine's strikes on civilian merchant shipping in mid-July, a legitimate concern given that some of these vessels carry civilian crews with no connection to Kremlin policy, but the strategic reality remains. Every tanker Ukraine disables is one less way for Russia to convert energy sales into cash for the war. These aren't clean choices. Modern warfare rarely offers any, but they're choices being made with clear strategic purpose. So where does this war stand on the morning of July 29, 2026? On the ground in Donetsk, Russia continues grinding forward at tremendous cost, with the Pokrovsk axis remaining the most critical flashpoint. Russia has massed well over 100,000 troops there by various estimates, yet still hasn't achieved the breakthrough it needs. Ukraine's defense is holding. In the air, Russia continues launching massive drone and missile barrages, with days of 6,000 drones becoming almost normalized, a grim milestone in itself, while Ukrainian air defense remains under strain but continues intercepting at high rates. At sea, Ukraine has just run the most successful maritime drone campaign in the history of modern warfare. 201 ships disabled, the Kerch Strait blockaded, Crimea's supply lines cut, and Russia's shadow fleet degraded. And on the diplomatic track, talks continue, but the battlefield, not the negotiating table, will ultimately decide the outcome. The essential point is this: Ukraine isn't merely surviving, it's innovating, rewriting how modern wars are fought, and in the process forcing Russia into a strategic position that grows harder to sustain with every passing week. The war isn't over, the suffering isn't over, the danger isn't over. But looked at honestly, following the military logic through, the trajectory of this conflict is no longer bending in Moscow's favor.